Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora, everyone. All right, shall I go first, Cami?
Kapai, I'm just getting the share set up.
Kia ora, I'm seeing some familiar names in there. No mai, ki tō mātou kōrero e pāna ki Mātauranga Māori I roto I Pāngarau. No uawa ahau, ko titirangi tōku maunga ko uawa nui a rua matua tōku awa. I live and teach in Te Tairawhiti at Gisborne Girls High School. And we've always really loved mathematics and kind of growing up on the East Coast, it's really hard not to be kind of surrounded by your Māori culture. And so I've been lucky enough to have grown up with a really, I think, kind of Māoritanga focused life. And so I'm really excited to be here and talk about this and kind of collaborate and just discuss my thinking and share my opinions, you know, and I do just want to say that they are just my opinions and that, you know, Māori are not a homogenous group, and so I hope you can pick something up that might be helpful. Yeah, tēnā koutou.
Tēnā koe, Jess. Nor America oku tipuna, ko tararua, ko ruahini, nā pai monga, e manaki ana I a o. Kei te papaioia aho e noho ana. Kia ora, ko Cami Sawyer, toko ingoa. So as Pip so nicely said, I'm relatively new to Te Tahuhu o Te Mātauranga, which is the Ministry of Education. But I am based in Palmerston North still, yay. So I didn't have to move, which was really lovely. So I just want to start and say, you know, we really feel for Jess's community and all the rain that they're experiencing and people in her area who are struggling. And for, you know, the broader community, I'm sure many of you who are in level 3, maybe just getting back into your school, maybe still not into your school. And, you know, a lot aloha to you. I know we're all just struggling and, you know, so hopefully you find this helpful and, you know, that it brings good things to your heart. So the purpose of the presentation is to, sorry, yep, there, that's better. My face was in my way of seeing my screen. The purpose is to reflect on Mātauranga Māori in your Maths and Stats program. So we're going to help you do that. And to help understand the Math and Stats subject expert group, how they interpreted the Mana Orite Mo Te Mātauranga Māori for the new level 1 Maths and Stats assessment material. So both Jess and I were on that side group before I was at the ministry. I was a university member of the group because before that I was at Massey University, and Jess was a teacher and one of our Maori experts, and she really helped us think about what the statement that Mana Oriti, equal valuing of Mātauranga Māori, what that looked like and what that means. So that's why I'm so, you know, privileged and pleased to have Jess here with us today to help share that. So thanks again, Jess. I wanted to start with the learning area, Whakatauki.
Yeah, kei hopu tō ringa ki te aka taipa, engari kia mau ki te aka matua.
And I mean, this is such, to me, coming in from America, you know, you don't see the vines clinging to the trees the way you do here, like the growths and the beauty of it. And it's, you know, so to me, this has a lot of New Zealand meaning as well as other meaning. This has been in our, as part of the curriculum, this was the Maths and Stats Whakatauki since, you know, the curriculum refresh in the early 2000s. So it's been around a while. So is this something you use in your classroom? This is something you might want to think about. You know, you display it in your classroom? Have you thought about it? What does it mean to you? So this is a good point for me to say that during this time, I'll be asking quite a bit of Patai questions during the presentation. And if you want to share your whakatū, your answers, your responses to those Patai, please do in the chat. We welcome that. Sometimes I'll be asking Jess to share her thoughts on it. Or if, there's something that it brings up to you and makes you think about. So, or if you have any whakaaro, any thoughts you want to share about it, please do. So and we can address those at the end, or Robin could stop us during it and we can address it as we go. If some of you guys probably know Jim Hogan, who is a former maths advisor and teacher in the Taupo area of New Zealand, and he has a really nice blog if you haven't seen it before. But he talks about this Whakatauki and what it means to him, and in terms of math teaching, and just that sometimes we get too focused on the assessments and we're thinking about, you know, just the little things that we just want some kid to understand, one little thing rather than the big picture. And that this Whakatauki is really kind of reminding us that maybe we should focus on the big picture. That's one interpretation, you know, in the maths and stats area that you could make of this. That's the beauty of Whakatauki, is that there are many. So Whakatauki embody values, wisdom, wit, common sense of the tangata whenua. So they use symbolism and metaphor to convey messages. So, and another thing you might be thinking about is literacy and how you're going to be doing that with your classes. And so right here, I mean, we have metaphor brought into our maths and stats thinking, which I quite like. And Whakatauki are something you can look up and learn about and use throughout your teaching.
Cami, there's just a question about, do we know who gifted the Whakatauki to the maths curriculum at all?
That is a really good question. And the answer is, I do not know that. That was asked at the teacher only days earlier this year. And so, something has gone through the ministry looking for somebody who might know. But yeah, I have not heard the answer back yet, but it is something that somebody's looking into. Pep, you were around back then. Yeah, we might.
Yeah, I don't know, but maybe Vince Wright might.
Yeah. So yes, it is something we are looking into. So Mātauranga Māori, what does that mean to you? How do you connect it to your maths and stats teaching? What do we understand Mātauranga to mean? In a second, I'm going to ask Jess to break down the word for us and help us understand it. But I really like this visual that I got off of Facebook. What a wonderful place. And it's from Rehumanize Mai, which they gave me permission to share it with you. And it's just, it nicely just is that visualization of showing, you know, Mātauranga is all kinds of knowledge, and Mātauranga plus Maori, knowledge, wisdom, understanding, skills from a Maori perspective. But as Jess already said, you know, Maori aren't homogeneous. They're, you know, it is a heterogeneous group. And so not all Maori will have the same knowledge and understanding. And so maybe you want to think, so what's important to the iwi in your area? Mātauranga au iwi. You know, some Maori don't like that reference to the iwi and see that as a colonized term. And so, you know, maybe you want to look at Mātauranga a hapu or a whānau. And if you're thinking about the whānau, then you can be thinking about that kid sitting in front of you and their whānau and the knowledge that they're bringing into the class from that. So I like that view of it. Jess, you willing to share with us your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'd love to. For me, and I think it's part of kind of the mathematics side of my being is I love looking at words and where they come from and what they're made up of. And Reo Māori is so beautiful. It's made up of so many metaphors that just mean so much. And so the idea of translating Mātauranga Māori into Māori knowledge it wouldn't even touch, I think, what it actually means. So I will share what I think it is, and you can pick it up or not. But for me, I look at the word Mātauranga and I see two parts: mātou meaning clever, intelligence, knowledge, and ranga meaning weaving together, ranga. And so for me, when I look at Mātauranga, I see a kind of a weaving together of knowledges, diverse knowledges, and adding on to that, Māori is just recognising that Māori come with their own knowledges and wisdoms and I suppose experiences that form their understanding of the world around them that looks distinctly different from other forms of knowledges. And Mātauranga can be tacked onto tauira, Mātauranga tauira, so most of us would call that like students' worldview and trying to relate our mahi to them and trying to make sure that our mahi, our teaching and learning we provide them, they see themselves in it, they see its relevance, they are interested and engaged. And above all, that they're learning something new and different that they didn't know before. And of course, that brings us back to what I call Mātauranga, the weaving together of knowledges, is that we're taking everyone's different understandings and we're building a new understanding together. Yeah. And that's including Mātauranga kaiako too. Like, I don't want us to think that, that our teachers and kaiako don't come with their own really amazing, passionate knowledges that can be shared with the kids. Yeah.
Very good point. Thanks. Yeah, it's all that when we're in the classroom with our students, that we're both learning from each other and it's weaving together that knowledge. I love that notion. So thanks for sharing that with us, Jess. So this is something that's come up a little bit. You've probably seen it more with science. It hit the news big with the science, but maths and stats needs to be thought as multicultural as well. Sometimes people go, well, maths doesn't have a culture. The dominant culture in society sees the world around them as acultural, without cultural. So if you see it as a culture, well, then that may mean that you're not looking at it from other people's perspectives. So the screen here is white. So, I like that view of that, helping to remind us that we need to color in those white spaces. So if you're not familiar with Anne Milne's work, I'd encourage you to look at that. And I've, been in several of her workshops and, I'm like, but is this true for maths too? And she's like, Cami, it's true for maths. Look into it, think about it. And so she really pushed me to think about the multicultural view of mathematics. And another example that I really like looking at is Rehumanize, who some of you guys might have seen the movie about him or know about him for other reasons. But I mean, if you don't know, mathematicians are still proving his theorems, things he wrote down over 100 years ago, and they're proving them to themselves now. Like almost everything he wrote down at that point has been now proven, and people are they're publishing all the time around it. So, and it was mathematics that he knew and understood, but it wasn't accepted from the dominant culture. It wasn't accepted as being true until they could prove it with a different mathematical lens. So it's just realizing there are different ways of viewing, maths is not just maths. There's different lenses around it. Stats is probably even easier to see that, because it all is situational. So we just need to remember that. Another way to phrase it is we need to rehumanize maths and stats. And if you haven't come across Rochelle Gutierrez before, she has a video on YouTube. It's an easy way. It's called Rehumanizing Mathematics, a Vision for the Future. It's an easy way to look up her material and think about it. And yeah, she really just gives us, we want to put the human into the classroom. We don't want to dehumanize students, and we don't want to dehumanize teachers. And so you might think about things we do now that might dehumanize one or the other. But I like thinking about, you know, the Mana Orite Mote Mātauranga Māori. What we can do for our Maori students is for all students. It's improving all of it. And this possibly, if you're Pākehā or if you're not Maori, thinking about it in terms of the humanizing might be a helpful lens for you. And just, she does go on and talk about why do we rehumanize? And she even has research, and she talks about it. Possibly, she said you could rename it decolonizing, but only under certain conditions. And, you know, we may still have a long way to go toward decolonizing, but we're trying, we're working on that path. Any thoughts you want to share around that, Jess?
No, not really. I think it talks to kind of utilizing identity, and it comes back to Mātauranga Tauira and Kaiako again, is recognizing that your identity as a teacher and their identities as learners and as children and as sisters and brothers, and you know, their identity does shape their understanding and therefore how they learn and what they learn from you. So try not to push it away as if you can be objective and say that, well, maths learning looks like this and I teach you this because there's no other way to do it. Rather, you know, this is what I know how to do and this is what I think, and what do you think, and kind of opening up the doors to allowing everyone in the room to share and grow.
Lovely. And I guess that brings us to that point that, you know, in our big ideas and the learning matrix that we did as part of the SEG for, you know, we came up with the 3 big process ideas, and one of them is that wānanga. So, and that's what we're doing right now. It's that conversation and listening to each other, talking to each other, learning from each other. And
yeah, wānanga, yeah. So that was, yeah, definitely to portray the understanding of learning regardless of being in maths or anything. It really needs discourse. You need to talk to someone else. And I know when I'm looking for solutions to problems I have, I don't kind of lock myself away and wander alone. I seek assistance. I talk, we argue, and then in the end, we come up with some kind of understanding that I think grows to richer learning. And I do think that needs to happen more in a maths classroom.
Yeah. So that's, in fact, she talks about recoupling the ideas to rehumanize connection, joy, belonging. And I think if you look at those process ideas in our learning matrix, that's exactly what we were on about. You know, when it talks about tidying a korero, and we want to have students, you know, creating conjectures, looking at stuff, experiencing that joy of discovery, and either proving or disproving something that they, you know, think is true, and that honunga, creating those connections. So I just thought it was quite interesting that Dr. Gutierrez had those same ideas that we had, and we hadn't seen this at the time. So. So what does Mātauranga Māori look like in your classroom? So there's, you know, one question, which I think when I came to New Zealand and, you know, entered a New Zealand classroom and started teaching, I think where I saw Mātauranga Māori, you know, in a way that I could notice it being in the classroom, it seemed to be Mātauranga before colonization ideas. The activities. And, you know, so if you think about that, and often I feel like, you know, you see stuff like that on the teacher Facebook page and stuff, you know, people at Matariki or something saying, oh, how can I incorporate this into my math teaching? So Jess, you want to share some thoughts around that?
Yeah, I might talk to the first question. Does Mātauranga Māori mean Mātauranga before colonization? I expect that question's about what's considered traditional Māori knowledge, I suppose, in that we're we talk about, I think we all can relate to the example of junior geometry and using tuku patterns and man, I just want to say a flat out no. And again, I do want to express that this is just my opinion. No, it doesn't. No. So Mātauranga Māori is a recognition that all of us have something to contribute, have a knowledge to contribute and learn from each other. And if you feel comfortable sharing a context like that, make sure you do it justice and talk to it and learn about it, and get, if you don't know, get someone in who can talk to the tuku patterns and where they come from and what they mean, because it's rich, it's wonderful. But if all you're going to do is go look at this pattern, what reflection can you see? That is the peak of what you're going to do with that Māori content, then chuck it out and pick something up that you can better talk to. So yeah, no, it doesn't have to be Māori concepts, whatever that means. I think it needs to be, if it's going to be done, do it. Yeah. And get
Nice.
help if you need help.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, Maori did not stop learning and growing, and, you know, at the point that they met Westerners, and they, you know, there's the Declaration of Independence and all that, even before the Treaty of Waitangi, and Maori were trading, and it was very clear, you know, and knowledge is not a static thing. So when we talk about Mātauranga Māori, we mean all Maori, we mean today Maori, we mean the future Maori. You know, it's a big body, it's not a single thing. Some of you may have attended Pania Tomorrow presentation at AMAonline at this day in term 3 2020, so last year. And if Pania is a mass education researcher at Massey University, and I really admire her and just think the world of her and her ideas. Is she, if you have not watched that presentation, I'd encourage you to watch the whole presentation, because here I'm just taking her words out of context to some extent here, but bringing in, explaining what she says about taking those contexts. And she says, if you're going to use kaupapa Maori things, if you're going to use Maori artifacts, and you want to find the mass in them, then it's beholden on you to make sure you do kaupapa and Mātauranga Māori as well. So just like Jess was saying, doesn't mean you have to have all that knowledge, but it's your responsibility to bring something in, or get students to bring stuff in and to incorporate that, and not just treat it as, you know, this mathematical object when it has a much bigger, richer history. Another thing that comes from Pania is she talks about, from her research, she did research with some kids and looking at pipi, and you have a collection of 120 pipi, and you're going to go share it among 4 whānau, 4 whare, and, you know, how are you going to do that? And her point is, and what she did with students, is that the context is a real world context, you know, to Ao mārama, the real world. But when a mathematician, a teacher, Ao Pāngarau, is asking it, they might be really thinking to Ao Pāngarau, right? You might be just thinking, oh, I just want you to evenly distribute this pipi. And te Ao Pāngarau can look different ways. We can, you know, somebody might have a te Ao Pāngarau that has a little more of the real world in it, or somebody might have one that really abstracts it out. So te Ao Pāngarau can mean different things, and you need to have those discussions with your students so that they know what world you're expecting the answers in. Or, you know, like, are you talking about just in mathematics and statistics, or are you talking about in the real world? So that they understand and have those conversations. Wānanga, again, we're bringing that up as a big idea. So if we pose maths and stats questions and put it in a context. When you answer, you and your students need to be thinking about, are we dealing with Te Ao mārama, or are we dealing with Te Ao Pāngarau or Te Ao Toanga? Am I just thinking about it statistics? Or maths. Statistics is really nice because it always is asking us, right, to draw those conclusions, look back at the original, but we really need to think in those same terms in Pāngarau and maths. We need to think about that whole big picture and allow students to have those conversations and think about other ways it could look.
Yeah, if you think of your own practice and you kind of go, a kid might give you an answer to something, and you as a kaiako, a maths kaiako is in Te Ao Pāngarau, so you kind of have an idea of what they should be saying, and they say something different. They're in their ao mārama, that's where they're at, they're in their own Mātauranga, and they're sharing that with you. So the question is, what are you going to do at that point? Are you going to kind of shut them down and go, no, this is the answer? Or are you going to go, oh, tell me more. Why do you think that? So, that's Mātauranga Māori. That's whether you're Māori or they're Māori or no one's Māori, that's the understanding that everyone comes with something. And this kind of diverse stewing of knowledge kind of starts forming and building and growing. And you can either kind of cut it off and go, well, actually, no, I'm just going to accept this one solution. Or you can open it up and you might find something amazing comes from it. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
So this might be a good point for me to, again, encourage you in the chat to to put in your own thoughts. Do you have examples in the past where you've run into that, where your Akanga have not been answering or seeing, their worldview is not the same as yours, and you're asking them questions that don't quite make sense to them. And so you have to explain it. Yeah. I can remember when we had an international student come in and we had something about, fencing, a classic kind of wanting to, calculus question, where you're wanting to get the perimeter to get the largest area of the fenced in, and they didn't really know what we meant by fencing, it's like, what are they talking about here? What's that mean? And so, engaging with a problem to really do a problem well, you have to understand what it's asking. You have to be able to think. And so, that's why providing pictures but the wānanga, having that discussion around it. So when we're incorporating Mātauranga Māori in our maths and stats class, we can put it into our teaching program. And we'll talk in a minute also about what's that look like in our assessment. So as I said, when Jess and I were on the SEG and we were looking at it, we started with the learning matrix and thinking, oh, we want people creating those connections. We don't want them siloing maths and stats anymore. We want them looking across the different mathematics areas, because as many of you, I'm sure, were already practicing that, in algebra, you want to look at a graph to help really understand what you're doing when you're finding, setting it equal to 0, that you're finding those x-intercepts. So creating those connections as we go, instead of treating it as algebra separately from graphs and those kind of things. So that was one of our first discussion, is what does that look like? And so that's what we put into the learning matrix. What other thoughts do you have around that, Jess?
I think a really simple kind of example would be if you're kind of doing something that has a New Zealand place on it, or like a map something, coordinates or whatever. It's really important, I think, to kind of go, what is the name of this place? I'm calling it Coromandel, whatever, but actually, where does that word come from? What is it called by its iwi? Who is it? So, I think you can tap on that Mātauranga Māori in a way that is just taking what you already do and have and know, and then adding into it what's missing, which is our local knowledge. Yeah, you find some fascinating stories about our places around Aotearoa, that's for sure, that the students would otherwise not have known, and you yourself will be learning that as well most of the time. But if you do have knowledge of an area, share that, you know, make it part of the discussion. We're not introducing a context. Yeah, just consider what knowledge am I missing out here?
Nice. Yeah. So I can tell you great stories about Te Papi Oia, Palmerston, like it's really fascinating looking to see why it has that name and the different stories people tell. And I'm sure Jess could tell you great stories about, is it Turanga?
Tūranga, yeah.
So
Tūranga nui a kiwa.
So yeah, look into that and help share that with your students and help them create those connections and what they know. Another idea is to possibly use whakapapa. So you've probably heard about whakapapa before. I've added this picture to the slide. Jess is probably going, why does she have the Simpsons on a slide? So whakapapa, you can think about it, and that's why most of us, if you've been in a process of learning Te Reo Māori, you've probably in your class, you know, used the whakapapa and talked about making those family connections. And but whakapapa has a wider meaning. It can also be about links between the origin of a thought and the implementation of the process into a community. So we can look at whakapapa in a broader way. And so when you introduce concepts in class, you know, you're doing algebra. Why do we call it X? You know, why is X used? Actually, I listen to podcasts a lot, and I heard a podcast the other day where somebody brought it up, and it was a reason I had never heard before. The original guy, that he was using letters towards the end of the alphabet in his writing, his textbook he was writing, and because of all the other words were using up his Z's and Y's, the X was the letter he had left over more often for his typesetting on a page. So that's the reason why X became the most common, because it's not used in other words in the English language. So they could typeset it when you had to, you know, write out a page back in the old days when you had to typeset. I thought that was fascinating. But, you know, bringing in other stuff, you know, about algebra and the meaning of it and where it comes from and how we brought that in, but how it was, you know, ideas were independently developed in different parts of the world. Great discussions. Geometry. Jess brought up to me the other day, talking about Pythagoras, you know, like lots of interesting stuff around that. And you can have students go and look up. I mean, there's lots of fun videos and stuff explaining and talking about it. And again, bring that wānanga and have them, you know, what did I learn?
I think we can all connect to, actually, most of us probably do a good job of utilising the whakapapa of mathematics in different ways. I know in my calculus class, when I introduce algebra to them, we talk about the whakapapa of our numbers sets and use that word whakapapa, use it, you know, make it explicit. This is what we're looking at, the history of numbers or Pythagoras or right angled triangles, you know, use the word whakapapa, you're describing history. But yeah, I just want to answer Roland's question. I hope I said your name right. What is the best place to start looking for appropriately authorized information about a topic, place, or event? My advice is start with Google search it. I mean, and then if you have some colleagues at your place that you think might be helpful, yeah, go and hit them up, see if they can help you out. I know I was talking with a science colleague yesterday, and she has this cockle investigation for Year 13 science, and she was talking about how we could use it for Year 13 stats as well. And I said, oh my goodness, we gather pippies and cockles, and you know, we actually can turn this into quite a rich task, and learn about our place as well. So I kind of thought, well, I think I know in Gisborne where I can get pippies and cockles, but I think I might need to talk to someone else about that. And my partner, he's been camping. He's a Hāti Tūranga Nui a Kiwa. He's grown up here. He knows where to go, and so I'll look to him. And so, you know, think about that. You know, who do I think, and do they have to be Māori? There are lots of really knowledgeable people out there. Yeah.
And also Facebook, again, is a great place, both the math teachers, but like I'm in the Maori word a day that's, and people are always asking really interesting questions. And, you know, there's just this load of just different Maori from across New Zealand answering and responding to questions and going, oh, well, but in my iwi we do this, and in my, you know, and people debating, and it's, you know, you get these really long considered responses. It's not just that, oh, there's one right way to do something. So it's a really nice way to view and look and see the variety of ways of looking at it, which is great. So Mātauranga Māori in assessment. What does Mātauranga Māori look like in assessment? Is this picture I'm showing right now what assessment needs to look at? I like that kid in the back.
We're not saying we don't like exams, aren't we, Carrie? We're not saying that. Well, personally, I like exams,
but is that what we mean in all when we look at assessment? Does all assessment need to be done like an exam, or is that what assessment could look like? So, Jess, you want to talk a little bit about what we were thinking when we were looking at the assessments in the SAG?
Yeah, definitely. I think certainly, I think we can talk to the internals and externals as separate types of assessments. And I think mathematics as a sector has been quite slow on picking up the idea of tests being anything other than something that looks and feels and sounds like an exam. So, so I think if wherever possible, make your assessment open. Make it open, make it broad, make it accessible to all of your kids. Try to limit the information you give them that narrows them into a one solution answer. For example, 1-1, if I talk to 1-1, instead of giving them a holiday trip, man, you're probably nutted the hell out of this one. But instead of giving them a trip that has all these clues, these are the constraints that need to be met, and in the end you end up with a single solution, leave it open. You're going away on a holiday. Who are you taking? How much is it going to cost you? You're going to need to find that out. How are you getting there? How long are you going away for? So the more, you know, you have a job, how much do you get paid? So the more that they can put themselves into the assessment, the more reliable you're going to get, the more reliable your data, because they won't look the same. And they'll be able to see themselves in the mahi, they'll be able to link it to what they do, and then hopefully they'll come up with some really amazing skills that they can use when they walk out your door. And that, I think, is powerful. So for our internals, I would encourage you to create the more open, the better, you know. Put in some clues, maybe some helpful hints if they need it, but otherwise let them pick it up. Let them pick it up, see where they take it.
Yeah, and let them understand what the assessment is. You know, that's part of it's like, okay, so we're assessing, we need to assess across these criteria. You're going to have to find ways to show me these separate things. Like, so, you know, how can you show me that you've used this skill in that idea? And the kids will be creative and come up with lots of things. So,
and let them talk to each other, let them talk to you, talk to them. You know, you'll need to understand the curriculum, you'll need to understand what curriculum level 6, 7 and 8 looks like, that's for sure. And so you'll need to be able to lead them into the mahi that they need to show, the evidence they need to show to make sure they're meeting that curriculum level. But let them talk to their mates. If your assessment's good enough, it shouldn't matter. Yeah, it shouldn't affect the reliability of your data. For externals, I think that's a bit more difficult, and like I said before, I'm definitely pro-examination. Like, I think that's a way of assessing that they need to experience, they need to practice, they need to get good at. Certainly if they're going to move into uni, we cannot ignore that. And I think yeah, I don't think there's one good way to do it. I don't think exam is just another way to do it.
And the unis are having to figure that out as well. I mean, COVID is really changing the world, definitely changing the world of assessment. So yeah, I was going to talk just for a quick minute. Sorry, I realize we're basically out of time and need to get to questions. So if you have questions, Patai, that you want to make sure that you're getting answered, go ahead and type them in the chat while I'm finishing up here. I was just going to talk a little bit about 1.2. And if you saw Komaui Me Te Rā and weren't happy with it, or I don't know what you thought of it, we did hear quite a bit at the ministry. We heard quite a bit of criticism of that task. And so some people were critical because they just thought it was so unrealistic. But pūrākau is a really important way that Maori have transferred knowledge over time, over centuries and centuries. I mean, so being oral language, like many other languages have been, you know, pūrākau, having your narratives, sharing those is a way. And, you know, most kids will know that story. And so the idea isn't we're throwing at them a story that they've never seen before. The idea that they're pretty familiar with it. And this is one example of it. But the idea is also not that you're sitting them in an assessment like this to do that task. That, you know, it's much more, you've discussed the story, the narrative, the pūrākau as a class. You've read it together, or they've listened to it, or whatever. And there's been some discussion before they're getting into the fact, okay, now we're going to use this as a basis to show some math skills. And so, I mean, and it's just one way of doing that. But that notion of using pūrākau, using narratives, I really like. If we go back to the teaching and learning, you know, how do we help kids retain this stuff for the longer term? How do we help their learning be something that they're intrigued by and want to hold on to for longer? Well, you know, that's exactly in oral traditions. How do you keep people remembering things? You tell it in a really interesting story. You tell interesting stories around it, and that helps you remember it. So maybe, you know, as your class, you want to come up with pūrākau around interesting, you know, your learning to help them, you know, have them invent their own. Or as we talked about at the very beginning today, Whakatauki, coming up with a metaphor to help remember it. The reason those things exist is because they do help our memories. And you don't want your student just to pass the test at this time, but this is, you know, if it's knowledge worth sharing with your students, it's knowledge worth keeping, right? It's knowledge worth them really understanding. And that's, I think, another one of our big points is, you know, the focus is on the learning. How do we help them really learn and understand this stuff deeply? That's my concluding idea before the questions. Jess, did you want to?
Yeah, no, what I love about Maui Me Te Rā is, yeah, kids do know the story of Maui and the sun. I do want to just reiterate that it doesn't have to be a Māori context or pūrākau to be Mātauranga Māori. So for those of you kind of not being able to connect to this task, that's okay. That's okay. And perhaps some PLD can come, that'll help us connect to it. But I think there's some rich mathematics that come for this, like how far the sun is away from Earth, and we use some trig in this task. I really love the mathematics that can come from this. And on top of that, they're assigning that mathematics, that really complicated stuff, to a concept, and they can visualize it, and they could, I think, connect to it, and then they walk out and they can remember it, you know, rather than just kind of a stock standard, how far away is the Earth from the sun? You know, I think this provides them with something they can assign their knowledge to, their new learning. Very cool.
So that's